With Luna 7, we now have the conclusion to a storyline that was first teased 4 years ago, in the Winter Nights Lazo teaser that released shortly before Sumeru came out in 3.0. Actually, that's not true. This story was first introduced almost 8 years ago, before the game even came out, with the Genshin Impact manga. That's where the Doctor was first revealed as a major villain, and that's where we met Collei, and learned about the God Residue experiments that she was tortured with when she was a child. But that's not all we got in Luna 7. Just about every single storyline introduced in Sumeru was revisited and given a conclusion. So let's discuss the quest, the references to past stories, lore implications, and analyze what actually happened in Acts 9 and 10 of the Sumeru Archon Quest. Or Sumeru Archon Quest, Song of the Welkin Moon. The quest starts with a flashback of a dream of Collei, which she's telling the traveler about in a letter. In this dream, the entire cast of Sumeru has had their fates rewritten, and everyone except Collei is occupying the fate of someone else. When she wakes up, Nicole does the Nicole thing and starts talking in her head about how she should tell Nahida and Traveler about it, hence the letter. Apparently, when she tells Nahida, our Dendro Archon immediately takes it seriously and investigates Irminsul, confirms that something is wrong, and evacuates all of the Sumeru forest region towards the desert. As we'll learn later, Nahida knows that Collei's dream vision came from Nabu Malakata, and as we know from lore, Nabu Malakata could see the future, so that explains why Nahida immediately took such drastic measures. Plus, the fact that, at this time, Dottore had already invaded Irminsul, and as Nahida says, she was very quickly starting to lose access to various aspects of it. Apparently, dead Dottore found a way to bottleneck the flow of information inside the ley lines, which was causing Irminsul to malfunction. If left unchecked, these scholars believe it could result in the exact situation Collei dreamed about. So, Nahida's response was to connect to Irminsul and basically become its information processor herself temporarily, but even a god wouldn't be able to maintain that for long. Luckily, before Nahida's powers gave out, she was able to provide some information on the nature of the problem to those waiting outside, but not enough to find a solution. So, at this point, all we could do is get her and everyone else away from Irminsul and complete the evacuation. Side note, you may have noticed that Nahida's passive mind-reading ability doesn't function during the quest, and I'm pretty sure the devs did that to emphasize the fact that Nahida's powers are restricted because of this situation. Nahida leaving was the moment that Dottore and Pantalone were waiting for. How exactly dead Dottore managed to retain enough will to bottleneck the ley lines and initiate this plan is a mystery, but he had been planning these events for many years, including his death. And at the time of his death, he had godlike powers, so he certainly could have found a way. Once Nahida disconnected, Dottore was able to exercise more control and push the evacuees even further away, and influence the minds of people who tried to return. With the city evacuated, Pantalone could freely move in and complete the second half of the plan. The Omega build Dottore, who deleted all his other segments, had split his soul into 2 parts. One stayed with the body and is whom we fought and killed in Nod Cry. The other was converted into pure data and entrusted to Pantalone for this exact moment. Pantalone invades Sumeru City to inject data Dottore into Irminsul directly, so that the 2 halves can recombine inside and allow Dottore to regain full knowledge and power after death, and start manipulating Irminsul from inside. His grand experiment is apparently to create an entire new world within Teyvat. Back to the protagonists. The gang knows that Nahida and Irminsul are codependent, so they need to figure out some way to heal both of them. Traveler determines that Dendro Dragon Sovereign Apep would have the power to heal Nahida, and hopes that she could be convinced to help. Nahida cured Apep of the corruption caused by forbidden knowledge during her story quest Act 2, so Apep owes us a favor. As for Irminsul, the gang decides they need to reactivate the Akasha system so that they can connect to Irminsul and investigate, but the Akasha relied on the Dendronosis for power, so now they need a new power source. Luckily, King Deshret was kind of a goat, and the technology he left behind might just do the trick, so everyone heads to the Temple of Silence to do some research. Some interesting things happen with Apep. First, we get confirmation that Irminsul has always existed, and the Heavenly Principles modified it to serve their purpose of controlling fate. We had a hint of this back in the Natlan World quest, where Kukul Khan says that he doesn't know how the heavens converted the ley lines into a girdle that defends the planet, clearly implying that the ley lines were there first. If we combine this with a lore drop from the Temple of Space, we can determine that the Heavenly Principles didn't do this modification until after the era of the unified civilization, because we're told that souls of the dead were ferried to the moons back then, not to the ley lines. So it would seem that the War of Funerary Flame and/or the Angels' Rebellion was the catalyst for a lot of changes to the way the world works. Now we have gods instead of angels, we had the creation of the Gnosis from the Third Descender, and we have Irminsul controlling the world instead of the moons. Second, Nahida gives us a cryptic message, which is never mentioned again. This immediately brings to mind the inverted statue that the Abyss Order was going to use with the Eye of the First Field Tiller to create a mechanized god, but that's kind of obvious. With a message this cryptic and a censored location, surely it's not just referring to a statue we already saw. We also used a different statue of Barbados to reach the Temple of Space, which is quite significant, but for the same reason, it's certainly not talking about that one either. Most likely, there's a statue out there that will allow us to do something even more drastic than entering the Temple of Space. Like maybe bringing us to the resting place of Phanes, some kind of abyssal secret, or something having to do with Nibelung. But given that it was a secret message from Nahida to the Traveler, and as far as she knew, it could have been her only chance to tell the Traveler anything ever again if the upcoming battle went the wrong way, I think there are only two things Nahida would have told the Traveler in that moment. Either some secret to defeating Dottore, or some secret lead she discovered that will help the Traveler reunite with their twin. Given that it never comes up again for the rest of the quest, that, to me, means it must be the latter. Next, Traveler goes to Gurabad, because apparently the Fatui went there and riled up the Jinn, who are now attacking everyone indiscriminately and creating sandstorms. Gurabad is also the last known location of Lilupar, and we know she'd have the power to calm the Jinn and sandstorms. It's possible Pantalone predicted we'd do that, so the whole thing is just a trap for the Traveler, but it really doesn't seem worth the effort to me. What they gained from trapping the Traveler and releasing the Jinn, they seem to have lost in the time and effort required to do that. So I'm wondering if there's a secret ulterior motive to Pantalone going to Gurabad that we don't know yet. In any case, after he traps us there, we are rescued by everyone's favorite mass executioner, Jet, and Benben. If you don't know her, I strongly recommend you do the Golden Slumber quest, followed by Dirge of Bilkis, and all the follow-ups that end with her foes rage like great waters. Otherwise, she tells you where we last left off, so no need for me to say much more on that. With her, we continue our mission to retrieve Lilupar. She is the Jinni responsible for the destruction of the ancient city of Gurabad, by orchestrating the downfall of 3 generations of rulers, with the final one using the Abyss, which finally destroyed the city. We last saw her when she decided it was her responsibility to suppress the Abyss that she released, so she left to go do that. However, when we find her, we learn that when we destroyed Gasoithoth in Natlan, that removed the abyssal threat Lilupar was facing. That in itself is an interesting point, because until now, the Abyss in every region has been entirely separate. Sumeru had to deal with forbidden knowledge, and Natlan had to deal with Gasoithoth. But this implies Gasoithoth also had a presence in Sumeru. And a deeper implication of that is, we know Gasoithoth's goal in Natlan was to infect the ley lines and then infect Irminsul. But because Natlan wasn't connected to the ley lines, it didn't really have a chance of success unless it could conquer Natlan and spread to a region that did have ley lines connected to Irminsul. But now, it seems like it did get into Sumeru, but for whatever reason it wasn't able to accomplish much besides helping Lilupar destroy Gurabad. Makes me wonder if, when King Deshret pulled up to punish Lilupar, he also did something with Gasoithoth to stop it from doing anything more. I'm not sure about the timing, but that could have been how Deshret got the forbidden knowledge that he accidentally released upon Sumeru. Let's move on to the next lore drop, which is Collei having the remains of Nabu Malakata inside her. That's why she was able to have prophetic visions, why she was able to calm the Jinn, and why she's able to channel the Goddess of Flowers later in the quest. Now, she got these remains due to a Fatui experiment, so I have to wonder why the Fatui were gathering up the incredibly rare remains of Nabu Malakata to inject them into prisoners. They wanted to see if it would work, but why? I'm betting they were hoping to gain Nabu Malakata's powers of foresight. They thought it was a failure because Collei's powers didn't manifest until long after they shut down the experiment, but I want to mention that they also created a delusion out of Nabu Malakata's remains. It was the one Diluc's father Crepus somehow obtained, evidenced by the fact that it had the exact same black fire power as Collei, which was never seen anywhere else. For better or worse, Diluc destroyed it, so that, plus what happens at the end of this quest, means we're probably not going to get any more answers to any of this. The last thing we learn here is that there's now a barrier around all of Sumeru, preventing access in or out. We later learn that this is in fact a defense mechanism of Irminsul, so that if some calamity happens in Sumeru, the other nations will be temporarily protected so that they have time to mount their own defense. Oh yeah, and I forgot the part where Nicole says the primordial humans, plural, created the angels. I've heard people say that was a translation error or something, so I don't want to go ham on it, but if we assume it's not an error, it still doesn't contradict much. Renee's legendary note about descenders implies that primordial human is another term for descender, and we've been told the Heavenly Principles is the first descender, so the big reveal here would be that Phanes wasn't alone. We've had some cryptic hints toward that, like Neuvillett's "one who came after" line about someone helping the usurper create the Gnosis. That's all I'll say on it in this video. That brings us to the final part of Act 9, where the gang decides that they need the power of the most advanced piece of technology that Deshret created, Aaru. Deshret's long-term goal was to separate his consciousness from his body and create a utopia where he and all of his people's consciousnesses could live forever in paradise. That was Aaru, a device capable of sustaining the alternate reality, though Deshret died before it was fully complete. Apparently, Deshret's true goal, if he had completed it, was to go back to a time where Nabu Malakata was still alive, so that they could be together. Sounds an awful lot like the ultimate goal of a character from Honkai Impact 3rd. The Golden Slumber is basically the same thing. It serves as an afterlife separate from the souls of the dead entering the ley lines. So, the gang thinks they can use Aaru's power to reactivate the Akasha and connect to Irminsul. To that end, we get Nefer to solve Deshret's riddle that kept 3 of the 7 pillars imprisoned, in order to secure their help in granting access to Aaru. Thankfully, all 7 pillars agree. 5 of them we see here explicitly agreeing, Apep implicitly agrees by the fact that she's restoring Nahida, and Cyno is the bearer of the only known remnants of Hermanubis' power, so he effectively can agree on behalf of Hermanubis. So, Aaru opens, and everyone contained within the Golden Slumber afterlife is released and returns to the actual ley lines. And hopefully you did that questline, or else this moment doesn't mean anything to you. Last interesting point, everyone turns into storks before landing on the leyline branches and getting absorbed, which is reminiscent of various mythologies where storks guide souls to the afterlife. On to Act 10. We begin with the gang discussing how to connect Aaru and the Akasha, and Thoth tells us that Aaru is based entirely on technology from Celestia, which Nabu Malakata sacrificed herself to steal from Celestia to give to King Deshret. We always knew she sacrificed herself to grant knowledge and power to Deshret, but now we know that all of Deshret's creations were a result of that sacrifice. I was kinda hoping that he came up with his technology himself, and the source of his knowledge would be a big mystery, but I guess this is the explanation. Either way, the Akasha was then based off of Aaru's technology, so there's hope for the plan of using it to power the Akasha. Skipping along, Apep finishes restoring Nahida and brings her to us, and Sarash and some Aranara show up. You learn all about them in the Kavarna of Good and Evil and Aranyaka quests, respectively. But none of that is too important to this quest, and they're pretty much just here to say, "Hey, remember us?" I guess the in-universe explanation is that they use their powers to ease people's minds about the terrible calamity we're facing. Nahida tells us the plan to connect to Irminsul with the Akasha isn't going to work, and we'll need a new one. Then we return to Caravan Ribat to root out a Fatui spy, and the only interesting thing here is Paimon joining Wanderer for a recon mission. They talk about how Paimon feels useless and wants to be better, probably foreshadowing a moment in the future where Paimon actually does become useful and helps out, or tries to, and it goes horribly wrong. Guess we'll see. Nahida talks about Irminsul some more. It seems that originally Irminsul was a conduit for Light Realm energy. When the Heavenly Principles arrived, they sucked all of the Light Realm energy out, converted it into the 7 elements, and repurposed Irminsul as a device to store all of the knowledge and memories of the world and manipulate fate. Further, we learn that Nahida was monitoring access to Irminsul to ward off anything trying to invade it. But unfortunately, there is no way to stop the main entry point, the one used by Dottore, which is death. Actually, there is. You just have to be the ruler of death to do it. When Renova placed the Curse of Immortality, the purpose of it was almost certainly to prevent Conrians from entering the ley lines via death. Perhaps she knew that one or all of them could threaten Irminsul if they entered the ley lines, the exact same way Dottore is now. During the conversation, a new Irminsul tree appears on the horizon, and the true name of the quest appears. If we want to relate every single game element to lore, this would mean these quest title overlays and likely the quests themselves are generated by Irminsul, which explains why all of the ones from the Archon Quest have been glitching ever since Dottore died. That makes sense on one hand, since quests that you have to complete are almost by definition your fate in the game. On the other hand, the quests are for Traveler, and Traveler is not bound to the fate of Teyvat, so it also doesn't make total sense. Unless they are not quests for Traveler, but are actually quests for Paimon, that she is responsible for guiding the Traveler along. Or crazier yet, in my Temple of Space video I suggested that the camera itself is a yet unnamed character that represents us as a player. So those quests would be quite literally quests for the player, both in terms of game mechanics and in terms of lore. So the plan starts to come together. Long story short, Aaru has a field that blocks Dottore from seeing what's inside, and we want to modify that ability to extend to every Akasha terminal so that everyone wearing one can freely move about Sumeru without Dottore knowing. Before then, Traveler needs to go to the border of Sumeru and Natlan to get the Pyronosis from Mawika, since the power of a Gnosis will be needed for the plan to come, and Traveler is the only one who can't be tracked by Irminsul. Lastly, we have many of these devices that we first saw in Nod Cry in the fight against Rerir. It seems they have the ability to convert elemental energy into pure Light Realm energy. I'm not sure why that's necessary, but I assume Light Realm energy must be more powerful. Lastly, an interesting interaction. Here we have Hypatia, the first person we ever saw in Sumeru, who was using Spirit Borneal Incense to meditate and connect to Irminsul. She accidentally connected her mind to Scaramouche when he was in the process of becoming a god, and he took her as his first follower. Now, the two of them come face to face for the first time, though only Wanderer remembers that any of that happened. She mentions meditating to connect to Irminsul now, and shedding tears for reasons unknown, possibly because she subconsciously saw some of that hidden past. In any case, the fact that she could do that proves that people can still connect to Irminsul. So phase 1 of the plan is to have every single person connect to Irminsul simultaneously using Aaru and the Akasha terminals, hoping that the sheer volume of those connections in combination with the strain that Dottore is already putting on Irminsul will cause the entire thing to shut down, thus stopping Dottore from breaking things further.
You would shut down Irminsul just to stop me?
Phase 2 of our plan starts with getting inside Irminsul, so most of the fighters gear up to attack the Fatui occupying Sumeri's city, one of whom is Rana, another character from the Aranyaka World Quest that we haven't seen since she got her vision. We also learn that Candace's shield and Dia's gauntlet are not only pieces of technology tied to 2 pillars of Deshret, but they can speak through them and apparently empower them. We'll take that Dia buff now, please. Candace too, I guess. Ultimately, we make it to the entrance to Irminsul. Wanderer and Paimon reflect on their journey since their first-ish meeting. Wanderer wonders if the Idea Association module has associated him with an ugly nickname yet. Wait, what was I? Never mind. Then Paimon decides to stay outside because her passive defense programming won't let her confront someone like Dottore, who's not currently being controlled by the Heavenly Principle's fate system, because then there's no guarantee she'd be safe. Wait, what? Whatever, it's just too dangerous. Inside Irminsul, we seem to be looking for some sort of main data transfer hub or something to that effect. which is of course right where we encounter Dottore and have to fight. But first, he lets us know that he figured out that Wanderer is Scaramouche. Most people probably are not surprised by this, because after all, we were told a person cannot erase themselves from Irminsul, so even though Wanderer made people forget about him, there are still traces of his records that Dottore could find. Luckily for Wanderer, Dottore says he's not going to restore any records, but it's pretty clear he told Pantalone about this, so the rest of the Harbingers are probably about to know who their missing 6th rank is. In any case, during the fight, Wanderer distracts Dottore while Traveler flies off to put that thing Nahida sent us onto one of these big pillars. This allows Nahida to establish a connection to Irminsul, and her location inside the Eternal Oasis allows her and her companions to connect Irminsul directly to Aaru, and transfer all records of the world from Irminsul to Aaru. The Eternal Oasis is of course a unique location created by Deshret using the power of the Celestial Nail, so I don't know, it just works. Then, Nahida enters Irminsul herself to help us fight off Dottore. Dottore's response is very reminiscent of when he opened the sky in his first boss fight, but we're inside Irminsul right now, so I'm not exactly sure what's happening here. Either he's pulling some of his former moon powers in from outside, which I doubt because Columbina owns those powers now, or he's pulling in power from the Abyss and corrupting Irminsul even more. Regardless, we bully him until he breaks the area and we all fall toward what must be the core of Irminsul, and that's when Nahida initiates the final phase. She gets the Pyronosis from Traveler and basically says, "Hey Shades, I'm about to destroy one of the most important things in the Heavenly Principles world. Is that cool?" So, the Shades take her aside and make sure she knows what she's doing. Side note, I was looking at the design of the Shade symbols and realized that you can associate a number with each of them. Istaroth's hourglass has 2 sides, top and bottom. Renova's whatever has what looks like 3 petals. And for Nibirius/Rhyndotter, we have a 5-petal flower in the back, but also a 4-pointed shuriken or whatever on top of it. The 4-pointed symbol has always been associated with Khaenri'ah, so I think that represents Rhyndotter, and the 5-petal flower represents Nibirius. Add in the fact that Asmodee is always represented by a 4-pointed star symbol, and each shade has a number, with the Heavenly Principles probably being number 1. I don't know if this means anything or if I'm just making stuff up, but I wanted to mention it anyway. While we're at it, if the 2 colors of different symbols represent Nibirius and Rhyndotter over here, what do the different colored bits surrounding Istaroth's hourglass represent? Perhaps the 1,000 Winds? Probably just a fun detail, but who knows? Ultimately, the Shades sign off on Nahida's plan and Irminsul burns. Dottore still tries to stop us from escaping the flames, but his own former segments that he previously destroyed all drag him away. Thus concludes the 3-phase plan to save Teyvat. Shut down Irminsul so Dottore stops using it to break the world, copy all necessary data from Irminsul to Aaru and leave the corrupted parts behind, then destroy Irminsul and all of Dottore's corruption along with it. In the conclusion of the quest, we hear how everyone is doing and get some more info on the Irminsul Aaru situation. There are still parts of Irminsul left underground, which could still contain leftover data, so I'm just gonna say it. Yes, Dottore could still be around in some form or another. But otherwise, Aaru has taken up all of Irminsul's functions, and thanks to Nicole's angel powers, Nahida is bound to Aaru now instead of Irminsul. The ley lines are probably separate from Irminsul, and so they just connect to Aaru now. That said, there is one function of Irminsul that Aaru could not take over, and that's controlling fate. This makes me wonder what happens to people who were previously able to read fate, like Mona, or even Barbaloth and Vetterfulnir, and Celino, and other augury birds from Linnea's story quest. Does this mean the future they saw in that quest is no longer certain? Meanwhile, Shniznaya sends a letter saying Dottore was a rogue element, so they're innocent. Right. And later, Nahida and Traveler go to Natlan to visit Mawika, where they talk about how the Pyronosis mysteriously disappeared. I mention those 2 things in rapid succession because I'm fairly certain every single thing that happened was all according to the Tsaritsa's plan. She wants to burn away the old world, and burning Irminsul is certainly a way to do that. Plus, the Gnosis disappearing has one obvious explanation, and that's that Dottore snuck it out while everything was burning and gave it to Pantalone, so the Tsaritsa now has all 7. The final thing that happens in the quest is Collei returning to where we first saw her in the manga, Mondstadt. While there, Nicole has her come to Windrise, where Lilupar is waiting. Why Lilupar had to come all the way there is unknown, but Windrise has proven to be a very special tree, so it probably has powers that can help in what happens next. Nicole and Lilupar, both having a connection to Nabu Malikata, are able to remove the remains of the Goddess of Flowers from Collei, resulting in Lilupar experiencing her presence one last time before they are both gone, bringing Collei's story arc that started in 2018 in the Genshin manga to a close. That covers the quest analysis. You may have noticed I skipped over one very important scene in the quest, that being the conversation between Pantalone and Dottore. Actually, I guess that was like 3 different scenes. And the reason for that is because I think it would be better to dedicate all of that to a separate video, especially when you factor in all the extra lore we get from the special item drops that you can randomly get from the Data Dottore boss fight. 3? Holy... Wait. Huh? That said, there is one part of that interaction that I want to mention now, and that's when we get dialogue options where we speak on behalf of Dottore, the way we usually do for Traveler. Anyone but Traveler having dialogue options is extremely rare. Sure, we control other characters all the time, but having actual dialogue options when we're not controlling Traveler has only ever happened once before that I can remember, with Columbina, and only on Moon Prayer Night. I do remember some flashback with Ramiria where we had dialogue options as someone else, but that was Traveler having a vision, so I don't think that counts. Columbina is of course no normal character, being a moon goddess, and Moon Prayer Night was when the moon was closest to Teyvat.
The moon really is closer than ever tonight.
But now we have Dottore while he's in control of Irminsul, also giving us dialogue options. It's possible I'm reading way too much into this, but I feel like a character getting dialogue options means something really important, such as they are in control of their own fate or something. But if anyone can remember any other instances of other characters having dialogue options, maybe we can form a better theory. Speaking of fate, I'm curious how all of this affects the Loom of Fate. Does this make it harder for it to work because it relied on Irminsul, or does this make the twins' plan much easier since there's no longer Irminsul anchoring everyone's fate? We haven't actually seen the Abyss Twin once in Song of the Welkin Moon, and we usually get one quest every patch cycle that expands on them and their plans, so maybe we're going to have one more major quest before Shniznaya. That said, it's usually also the Dainsleif quest, and we already saw Dainsleif, which expanded on Conria a lot, and that's also usually what the twin does. So maybe that's all we're going to get in Song of the Welkin Moon. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And speaking of Conria, the last lore implication I want to mention is the Curse of Immortality. As I said earlier, the Curse of Immortality was likely a measure to stop anyone from Conria getting into Irminsul, because one of them might have done what Dottore did. But with Irminsul out of the picture, is the Curse of Immortality still necessary? I suppose Aaru could get infected with something as well, but maybe not? Either way, I guess that's up to the ruler of death. I'm sure we'll see more consequences to the events of this quest, just like we saw consequences to the actions of Capitano after Natlan. So, to wrap up this video, let's comment on the few things that this quest did not wrap up. Despite Deshret being a major element of the quest, I still feel like there's so much more to him that we need to discover. For example, that ruin of his that Faruzan fell into that put her in stasis for 100 years that no one else ever found again. Plus, we still have no idea what Deshret even looked like. His only depiction is this star. We've seen 2 different pictures of Nibelung, a picture of the first angel. I feel like the only historical figures we have not seen the true form of yet are Phanes himself and Deshret, and the Voyager. Speaking of the Voyager, I understand we have a new artifact set with tons of juicy lore, but I haven't read it yet. Nor have I read any of the lore that I'm sure is in Nicole's profile, so those things will have to wait for another video. So that's 2 videos I'm planning on in the near future, a Dottore Pantalone video and a new artifact and Nicole lore video, assuming I can think of relevant things to put into a video about them. But aside from that, I think we can end this video there. Thank you for watching, and consider subscribing if you want to hear me talk about Genshin lore some more. Oh yeah, what the heck is the deal with that lizard that keeps showing up everywhere?